Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Carol Timmings, and I am your President-elect and have been leading these governance consultations in my capacity as Chair of the Governance Committee since July. And you folks have the privilege of being our last consultation. So thank you very much for joining. I want to give a very brief description of some of the technical aspects and the House rules for the webinar, and then I'm going to move right into the presentation. So after my presentation, when you have a question, we ask that you please type your name into the text box on the bottom right of your screen, and then you'll be placed into the queue. Or if you prefer, you can type the full question or comment that you may have, and then Sarah will read it out for you to others on the line. If you prefer, you can also just ask your question over the phone, and Home Office staff will say your name, or and then you will have approximately 1 minute for your question or comment. So we haven't had an issue really with needing to use our time signals and so on. We've generally had ample time for people to contribute all that they would like to, so I'm going to skip over that. Essentially, as you can appreciate, our goal is to make sure that all participants have a chance to have your voice heard in this consultation. So let me move now to provide you with an overview of the context in which these ideas and recommendations occurred, and then I want to introduce recommendations that are coming out to you for consultation by the Board of Directors. And then once I'm done, then there will be a chance for your question and comments. Okay, so in terms of background, so in 2012, the board actually struck the governance subcommittee to examine our governance model and to look at the literature in terms of best practices in board governance in relation to associations such as our own, and examined other models that are around and that are similar to our organization. And this was done with the understanding that the current structure of the board that we have has actually been in place for at least 4 decades. And you can imagine 40 years ago, RNAO had a home office looked much different. They had a very small staff and a somewhat limited scope and capacity. So the member-at-large positions, I want to speak to this right up front. The member-at-large positions back then were actually created with the express purpose of focusing on specific domains of nursing practice. And once again, this related to the fact that there was much, much less capacity at home office across all of those domains, actually. But today, the association enjoys a staff of 90 full-time employees, which I think speaks to the tremendous growth and evolution of RNAO. And these employees, through collective expertise, have very robust capacity across all domains of both nursing and organizational performance. So now to the actual purpose of the consultation. The purpose of the consultation is really threefold. The first is to inform you, our members, of some of the thinking around potential changes we could make to our governance. We also want to gather your feedback. I'm sure you have questions, thoughts, suggestions, and we're very interested in hearing that. And we've actually heard some really rich input over the course of the consultation since July. And then ultimately, we want to take this feedback and develop motions that would then be brought forward at our May AGM in 2016 for 1 member, 1 vote. So essentially, these consultations are really to glean your feedback and then for this feedback to inform the motions and the bylaw changes that would happen. This is no decision making in this phase of the work, only consultation. Okay. And on the next slide, this will just give you a little look back at where we've been in terms of our consultation. So we had, how many? 10? Nine consultations spanning the summer months and then well into the late fall. So we hope that we have provided ample opportunity for members who are interested in inputting into this process to do so. I should add at this point that we've also been getting some interesting feedback directly through to Sarah, people who have gone online and listened to the webcasts of previous consultations and have read the material and have just fed their thoughts and ideas that way. So let's move on and to show you what the focus of the consultations have been to date. Next slide. Oh, there we go. All right. The screen's a bit slow here, so thank you. So I'm going to move across this quite systematically. You'll see the template here. So in the upper left-hand corner, so I'm going to go through what our current structure is, what we're proposing by way of changes, and what the process could look like. It's not definitive that it would look like this, but just thinking about how we could bring about these changes if, in fact, this is the direction the membership wishes to go. So currently we have on our board 5 positions that are member-at-large positions, and these encompass the 5 domains of practice as listed below here on the screen: administration, education, nursing practice, nursing research, and socio-political affairs. And one of the proposed changes is that we would look at incorporating the MAL domain expertise into the regional role representatives. So part of the thinking here is because there is so much capacity at home office in the areas that we could best get board input into this by perhaps embedding these domains of expertise into the regional representative role. So any regional rep would carry 2 responsibilities, expertise and then a geographic responsibility for bringing forward that perspective. And the criteria for the regional role could be defined in different ways, and this is simply only one scenario. There are different ways that this could be operationalized. But the first could be to have some domains that are more general skills in terms of nursing, and then some very domain-specific skills drawn from the current MAL roles. And then we could actually have these aligned with the regional reps so that it could rotate from region to region at each election in order to ensure that there would be, rotation and some geographic diversity as well here, bringing perspectives to this. So once again, just a possible process. In a corresponding change to that, of course, to look at the 5 MAL positions that are on the board currently. And this would mean that we would actually look at removal of those MAL positions. And in order that this could happen in a fairly seamless way without destabilizing the board, we look at continuing with the regularly scheduled election for 2060 MAL positions, but those positions would just have a 1-year term, and that would allow us then to accommodate this transition by moving them, if we were to transition, to move them into the regional round. The next change relates to student representation. Currently on the board, we do not have a student representative, and the proposal is that we would look at the addition of a student rep. This is a change that is being very well received to date, and it would be decided, of course, by 1 member, 1 vote at our next AGM. Area under consideration is that of adding a public representative. Currently on our board, we do not have, as you know, a public representative. And in looking at the literature looking at other comparable associations and governance structures, many do have public representatives on their board of directors, and this seemed to be particularly timely and in keeping with our vision provincially, or the ministry's vision, of bringing the patient voice, patient-centered or client-centered care, and bring that patient perspective into our deliberations. So this also would be decided at one member, one vote, through one member, one vote. The next area under consideration relates to interest group chairs. Currently on the board we have one interest group chair, and it's a fairly daunting task for one interest group chair rep to represent 30 the perspectives or issues, or even bring forward some of the highlights from 30 interest groups, which is an amazing array of interest groups and incredibly important work happening in these interest groups. So there was a thought that perhaps we consider the addition of a second interest group chair for a total of 2. So that would look at dividing up the work of representing the interest groups across 2 board of director positions. And once again, this would be decided through one member, one vote at 2016 AGM. And the final change being brought forward relates not to board composition, but rather to the term of the board. And currently we have a 2-year term when you come on the board, and then there is an option of one renewal for a second 2-year term. So that's current state, and the proposal coming forward for your thought is, and your feedback, is changing to a 3-year term, so that we actually have one 3-year term on the board. And the thinking behind this is that it often takes a year before, and we've learned from previous board member experience that it can often take a solid year before people feel really comfortable in their role and understanding the governance role, their governance role, and the working of the board. And then they actually have the 2 subsequent years in this model, or in this concept, to actually put that into full action. So they'd have 2 solid years in addition to 1 to kind of get their stride in their role. And the thinking here was that this could be transitioned not next year, but rather during the 2017 call for nominations. If this were to be the direction the membership wants to go in, it would allow for a smooth transition from 2-year term to 1 3-year term. Okay? So that is the overview of the proposed changes. I now want to move in, given that you're later on in our consultation process, you have the benefit of hearing just a few little highlights of some of your association colleagues have thought about some of these ideas and some of their concerns and questions. So the first relates to removal of the MAL positions. In this area, I can say there's somewhat mixed response to this. People wanting to understand more fully what we actually hope to achieve by removing the MAL positions, and concern raised about the workload. Like, is this really doable by having a representative who's representing perhaps a large region also be responsible for domains of nursing practice as well? And then we've had some that expressed concern with the loss of socio-political affairs rep, or the potential loss, and the education rep particularly. So they felt that some of the MAL roles could be embedded into the regional rep, but there were a few that they didn't think that could so easily happen with, and they added these 2 as examples. So that's, as I say, it's been a mixed response to date. When it comes to the student representative, I can say, looking at my colleagues here, I can say I haven't heard any dissenting voices to adding a student representative. essentially, today's students are tomorrow's nurses and nursing leaders, and as such, sorry, that's my phone going off, and as such, it made a lot of sense to bring that student perspective to the board. I think the question relates more to how that student would be selected, and also to ensure that the student is mentored, that it would be quite a leap for a student to come on the board, and just to make sure that other board members would pay attention and mentor those students along in their role. This relates to public representation. Once again, questions about wanting to be really clear on the purpose of adding a public representative to what is otherwise a professional board. So certainly those kinds of questions, and others think that it absolutely is in line with putting patient at the center of our work and of the nursing profession, and felt it made a lot of sense. Some expressed concern that a public representative might be in a position to lobby the board or to be bringing forward a special interest, particularly, and just wanted to make sure that there would be mechanisms put in place that could mitigate against this happening. And of course, we talked about the fact that on the board we already have, conflict of interest declaration, but that in researching this with other boards, there are absolutely criteria that would be in place in terms of selecting a public representative, and I'll speak in a few minutes about a possible process for that to happen. Wanting to make sure the rep would not necessarily always come from Toronto or the GTA, that we look at geographic representation over time, and finally to make sure that there was that the person would be, in terms of their board representation and board activities, be nonpartisan, so not coming on with any particular political, shall we say. In relation to the interest group chair representatives, once again, overwhelming support with the idea of adding a representative for interest groups. Most are members of interest groups and realize that, there's a lot of work that happens there, and that it must be almost an undoable task for one interest group rep to do justice to that at the board. So we even got feedback that perhaps we should consider adding a third, not just one additional one, but additional interest group reps. And then some expressed opinion around making sure that the division of the interest groups across the representatives, that we wondered how might that be done. Some offered some suggestions about perhaps clustering those, so that would mean if there were 3, they would each have 10 interest groups, and so kind of look at what that mix might look like in terms of clustering those interest groups across the 3 representatives. When it comes to a term limit, once again, fairly mixed reviews on this. I can say they're pretty evenly split so far on the consultation, so some of these are going to be tough for the board to grapple with. Some feel absolutely the move to a 3-year term, for all reasons I've talked about, might be a good move. Others very concerned that it could be too long a time to serve. Signing up for anything for 3 years, a lot can happen in 3 years. So some members expressed that term may kind of preclude some who might otherwise put their name forward. Some concern or questions asked about how this would affect the size of the board, and it wouldn't really. This didn't relate to term limits. These were just general concerns or questions. So some questions came forward about, with these proposed changes, is going to make the board bigger, much smaller, and I can tell you that we've looked at that as a board, and really the variation is minimal. One of our current board has 21 members, and our the proposed model that I'll get to in a minute, that kind of brings all of these proposed changes together so that you can see them on one slide, we get 9 members. And of course, you know, the CEO is ex officio when we make this count. So that's what we heard. Then if we move to the next slide, and then I'll soon be opening it up for your thoughts. But I want to just give you a sense of what options are looking like in terms of how this is taking shape. You know, we will be putting options out for your voting, and the next task of the governance subcommittee and the board will be to actually synthesize this feedback and really look at the major themes and how that can actually come to fruition to give distinct options that members have different options to vote on. So you can rest assured that the option of status quo is always an option, notwithstanding that we've had this structure for quite a long time. Some may feel it has served us well, and so the option of status quo will be going out for your vote. So rest assured of that. The next option, which we're calling option B, is what the board would look like if we put into play all of the changes that I've just gone over with you. So essentially the board would be comprised of a president and president-elect, or in the case of, you know, alternate years, there could be a past president, right? So we always alter in even and odd years between that. And in addition to that, you would see a board that would have a student rep, a public rep. You would see a board with 2 interest group chairs instead of 1. There would be the deletion of the MAL roles, so there are currently 5, and those roles would be gone. You would see those distinct roles would be gone. You would see the incorporation of these domains of expertise actually embedded in the regional representative roles in this option. And in this option, the board term of office limit would go from 2 to 3 years with no renewal. And as you know, it's currently 2 years with an option for a one-time renewal. Now, the other variation based on feedback we've heard could look something like this, and you can appreciate we could keep playing with some of this, which of course when these consultations are over we will continue to do. But in the option, which we're calling option C, the president and president-elect scenario would be the same. We would look at adding a student representative, and the possibility is we had one suggestion that it actually could be the NSO chair that might be a reasonable way to recruit a student rep to the board. We are currently in the process of surveying this group just to get a sense of how they feel about the proposed governance change, particularly with respect to adding a student voice to the board. So that's just one scenario. We've had some other suggestions as well. Incorporating this option would also see adding a public representative, and the way we could look at this is by asking Patients Canada, who is the national group that does an incredible job of bringing patients' voices to a range of governance and policy matters across Canada. And so we could ask the Ontario arm of this group to look at bringing forward a public representative nomination to the board. The difference in this option is we would look at, instead of incorporating the MAL or the domains of expertise into the regional rep, we could look at the incorporation of 2 additional interest group chairs for a total of 3, and then what we do now that we would have 3 interest group reps who would each have approximately 10 interest groups each, we could look at then incorporating the domains of expertise into those interest group rep roles. So they carry kind of a dual roles, right? And you can imagine that could take, we could play with this in terms of how that might matrix in a variety of ways. But one scenario is that you could have 2 MAL interest groups for clinical practice domains and 1 MAL interest group for more the functional domains of administration, education, and research. But these combinations could switch up as well. So, and this as well could look at a change. This option C would look at change in term limit from 2 to 3 years with no renewal. So that's kind of the scenarios and the changes that we'd like your views on now. So let's spend our remaining time getting your thoughts on these options, or more specifically, let us know of those specific changes, what you agree with, what you like, what you don't like, or think will work, things we've thought about. So I'm going to open up the screen and the line to you, our participants tonight. I'm happy to go back and explain anything further that if I know it's a lot for you to digest in 3 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Hello.
Yeah, hi, Carolyn. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, it's Carmen Rodriguez on the line.
Hi, Carmen.
How are you?
Good, and how are you?
All right. The first thing that comes to mind, I have been a board rep, and I have been on the board for the 2 terms there, 2 consecutive 2-year terms. For me, the fact of limiting it to 1 3-year term, I have to say that, you know, the world of nursing employment is changing so rapidly. It is very difficult, I find, personally, at this time to commit for 3 years. I remember when I was on the board, it was almost like having a second full-time job. Or, you know, like you said, the first year you're learning the role, the second year you can sort of impact, and then I decided to pursue for another 2 years, which was wonderful. My employer allowed me to do that. And when applying to the board, you really need to have administrative support from your employer and say that they're going to let you go, you know, to the meetings. And, you know, the thing is, sure, you can go, but it is expected that you'll pick up your workload when you come back, or you do it when you're there. You know what? And it can be a heavy burden. So commit to 3 years, not knowing, you know, what, you know, I have to say that from year to year, there are different priorities that are coming out of the government in order for hospitals or community support agencies or community to get, you know, funding.
Yes.
You know, when you're an employee, you have to remember that your employer is paying you to do what their strategies are.
Exactly.
You're not paid by RNAO to do your volunteer work. It's volunteer work that you are doing for RNAO. So I have to say that you know, I've been on different occasions volunteering my time. It's because you had the possibility, the opportunity to do so, and I've had administrative support. And right now, I remember recently somebody asked me, well, how much time are you going to give them? And I had to present the documentation that had been sent to me by RNAO in terms of what my time commitments were, because my employer initially was not that receptive, allowing me to just do a lot more for RNAO than I would do for the organization. So I would keep that, I would take that seriously under condition, because nursing jobs are crucial right now, and if you want to keep your employment, your first legal obligation is to your employer. And whatever volunteer time you have thereafter is up to you to decide how you're going to invest your energy and your efforts. Well, in a way, it's a 3-year commitment, and I remember, you know, being on the board was very time-consuming with all the emails that we would receive and having to sort of discuss that up with, you know, members of our region, because I was a regional rep.
Yeah.
So it was very time-consuming, and I personally, you know, when you're trying to put the MA position onto the regional rep, my God, that's another responsibility, because, you know, if you have to deal with, you know, what's doing in your own region in terms of the issues that are coming up with the board, you know, the RNA board is supporting and what they want you to transfer that information to your members.
Yes.
You have to have regular meetings with people in your region in order to inform you. You have a newsletter, but people want to meet you face to face. Now, you know, it's hard to be, the socio-political, the education, the administration. It really depends what your background is, unless you want it to be sort of just an elite organization because you'll have key people in education, socio-political, or education, or, where else a mandate they have as the MAL right now, being those regional reps. And, some areas have very extended areas. I mean, when I think of Sudbury, they have 4 chapters, other places 3 chapters. It's kind of different. But, I think that you're putting a lot more work on the regional reps' shoulders.
Yes. Thank you so much for your feedback. And that is, you've articulated it beautifully in terms of some of the concerns we've been hearing. It's emerged as a real theme in terms of make that commitment, as you say, in terms of, balancing, not balancing, but your first commitment, of course, is to your employer. It must be. And yet you have to go in with your eyes wide open also if you do volunteer for things, right? So thank you for that. I think it's very much in keeping with very much what we've been hearing back about moving if we were to consider that. So thank you. I appreciate that. And I think your other point around wanting to make sure that whatever our governance model is, that we want to be reflective of the range of nursing roles, right? And it's important that things like term limits and the opportunity of diversity across roles be there so that people see if it is an area they want to serve the association in, that they see it's accessible to them and they see a possibility there. So much for that.
Carol, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, Hélène Lacroix. And, hi, I think that the idea of relooking at the membership for the board is a really great one. My comment is around the member of the public.
Yes.
For the last probably about 2 months, I've been looking into this a little bit more for my own organization, but heard from members of the public around and others around a feeling of tokenism when they are on healthcare committees, such as the one that you're proposing, the role that you're proposing on the board. And not that I don't think it's a good idea, it was a double negative. I think it's a good idea to have a member of the public on the board. I think that it would behoove RNO and all of us really to make sure that that member has a valued role amidst the other 18 or 19 nursing representatives, and we make sure that their voice is heard, their voice is meaningful. And also I think another challenge of only having one member of the public is that somehow their voice represents the larger public and not too narrow of a view of the issues related to healthcare.
Right. Okay, thank you so much. All really important considerations. Do you have, and I think you're quite right, that's always, interestingly enough, that came up, that same sense of, whenever you have one of anyone, right, not feeling that it is, it's to be the only person on a larger board that's there, whether or not you're as a student or a public representative or whatever, right? So being mindful of that, but also making sure that it is a meaningful role, and that should the membership wish to go this way, that it be clear in terms of what the value proposition would be with the public representative on the board.
Yeah, and I have to, if I make one other comment, I think it's nice.
You're most welcome to.
I think it's great that you're pulling from a patient committee that already exists, or patient groups that already exist, because maybe there's also the possibility of making sort of almost like a constituency that they represent, and they get information pulled from there. So just another sort of maybe thought on getting a broader perspective, and then just making sure also that there's some opportunity to pull from lessons learned that they have around membership and meaningfulness.
Excellent suggestion. Thank you. I should let you all know that all of these, comments, suggestions, we're taking careful note of them, and so that we really are paying attention to your feedback and suggestions. That is what's going to so richly shape this. Thank you. Other thoughts, questions? Nothing so.
I'm wondering if you would consider voting on each of these different resolutions one at a time, as opposed to lumping them in B and C.
Yeah, that actually has come up as well, because what we've been hearing is that, and I can tell you we are considering how best to bring this forward. What we want to ensure is that each of these, I guess two things. One, we want people to see what these various scenarios would look like in their entirety, right? So rather than bringing together just isolated pieces. However, we also want enough options so that members do not feel like they're kind of being squeezed into a particular decision. So, for example, let's say somebody supports having a student but doesn't support having a public representative. So we would want to make sure that the various scenarios or options, or however these bylaws get constructed, that it disentangles these so people feel that they've had a sufficient array of options to vote on. Does that make sense?
Because aren't these all separate bylaw changes? So I thought you would vote with them each one at a time as opposed to lumping them in, because option B or C, I mean, there are some things I agree to, but there are others that are more controversial that I would not agree upon.
So we are looking at each of those would be, each would be a separate proposed composition. That's one way to look at it. So, so it could be a variety of proposed bylaw changes, but each one would stipulate the composition of what that board could look like. See what I'm saying? I'm saying, because here's the possibility. We know we could never incorporate, like, let's say, for example, people said we'd like 3 member at large, we'd like, 3 regional reps, but we still want to keep all the MA, or we still want to keep all the MALs, but we will add 2 more in-group reps, and want to also, add a student and add a public rep. Well, next thing you know, you've got a very unwieldy board, right? So we want to somehow look at this in a way that still pull out the various options, but actual bylaw change will have that out.
Well, there are some bylaws here that wouldn't change too much the working of the board. However, there are other options, separate options, that would totally change the functioning of the board.
Correct.
When you lump them in like that, it's like, you may do a discredit to lumping them all in as opposed to keeping them separate and having the discussion around the separate issues.
Right. Well, the discussion, yeah, so when it goes, I hear what you're saying, yeah. So when this goes forward, for 1 member, 1 vote, we certainly will need to delineate what each of those changes be.
Well, the impact.
Yes.
Impact. There are financial impacts. It's wonderful for RNAO because this is a platform that would make 1919, whether you have 5 MLAs or whether you don't.
Right.
But for people who are actually participating on the board, it would make a big difference.
Right.
So it depends from which perspective you're going to explain what the benefits and risks are, or what the disadvantages are.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And we would need to make sure that for each proposed change that would go out for voting, your point is well taken. We would need to definitely describe what the change is, right, in terms of everything from board size to, you know, the criteria. If we add 3 of this, it means this particular option could only have 2 of these type thing, right?
Sure. Either vote on each one of those separately as opposed to lumping them all in.
Okay. That's all. Thank you. Look at that, absolutely. And it has been pointed out to us as well that the term itself is a whole separate piece, right? Because that is not about the competition. So it would be its own as well. The office.
Fine.
Do that, Carmen. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Am I hearing, if I can just, understanding that there really isn't, so there is a sense that the MAL position should stay? As discrete on the board, as we're looking at those becoming embedded or integrated into either a regional rep role or an interest group role.
If I can comment, and I probably represent a large number of our NEO members, and say then, speaking again, having not ever been on the board, it's very difficult for somebody like me to comment. Conceptually, it seems to make a whole lot of sense, especially with respect to who and how you're sort of making the changes, and also with respect to the fact that just the composition of the staff at our NEO is very different. But without having been on the board and knowing exactly what the workload is, it's difficult to comment.
Right. All right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Anybody in the queue here? No? Any other aspects that you would like to comment on?
As far as speaking, I have to say that when I was on the board, we had key people whose main focus, domain of expertise was exactly what the MALs are doing now. And it made a huge difference because we were learning from them, because we are not, everybody has, you do the best you can with what you have and what you bring to the table. And somebody whose domain was the expertise of either education, research, or socio-political affairs, a significant difference. And, we weren't expecting that from the regional reps because there was just so much area to cover just to get that information out to your members.
Mm-hmm.
It would almost be like trying to dissolve the domain of expertise into the regional role rep, which is like, well, wow, that's pretty heavy. Okay. No, that's very helpful to hear. If you already have that expertise, and those people usually have high positions, I have to say, somewhere in their own organization. So, and I have to say that probably a lot of them were from Toronto, not necessarily from other regions. During my time at the board. So, it puts a different spin on when you're bringing those issues related to those domains at the board.
Right. And that geographic diversity is so key. So.
Oh, definitely.
Yes. Okay. No. Well, is there any other last comment that you would to make? That really is the essence of what we wanted your thoughts on. I know that sometimes if once you get off the call and you think about a little bit more about it, we have had some that have participated and then subsequently emailed Sarah some additional thoughts, and so you are always most welcome to do that. And also, if you had a question after you got thinking about how this might work out, by all means, this is just your opportunity, but you can certainly do that. And Sarah, how long do they have to do that now that this is our last consultation webinar, per se?
I mean, we can still keep, it will go to the end of November for further reflection, but we can continue to collect comments and go from there.
Okay. So, let's say probably till the middle of December or so. We do have a board meeting coming up so that we can report back on sort of the emerging themes and so on. But by all means, if you're talking with nursing colleagues in your regions or in your places of work who are members and, additional interest in people wanting to input, we're open for that. But this is the last formal webinar tonight. Okay, so if there isn't anything, then I will just conclude by thanking you so much for taking the time out of what I know are busy schedules, and you've joined us this evening, so thank you for giving of your time and your voice and your thoughts. And we look forward to bringing a proposal forward for one member, one vote in May. All right. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
You too.